The sky was dark and endless. The wind was sharp, cutting like broken glass. Snow and ash mixed together and covered the ruined ground. The city was silent. Only empty walls stood like skeletons. The alien mother walked slowly, carrying her child, close to her chest. Her arms were thin, her body weak, but she did not stop. She could feel the cold pressing against her skin, biting deeper with every breath. Her child was shaking, small and fragile, like a dying flame. The child's eyes were half closed, his lips pale, his breath shallow. The mother pulled him closer, wrapping what little fabric she still wore around him. But the cloth was thin, torn by days of use, wet from snow and tears. It could not fight the cruel cold. The mother looked at the horizon, but there was no light, no sun, only endless night. Her people had once spoken of warmth, of fire, of a future. But now only ruins and silence answered her steps. She reached a broken wall and sat down, her body trembling. Her child whimpered, a weak sound that broke her heart. She looked at the small bundle in her arms and pressed her forehead to his. Her skin was burning from the cold, yet she whispered, "Stay. Stay with me." But her language was useless against the wind. Her voice was a ghost in the empty streets. She looked at the scraps of cloth left on her shoulders. Only a few thin pieces remained, hardly enough to cover one arm. Her child's body shook harder, his teeth clicking. The mother closed her eyes, and with pain in her heart she tore the fabric from herself. The cold struck her bare skin like knives, but she wrapped the cloth around the child. She placed it tight, covering his chest, his arms, his tiny legs. She rubbed his back with her hands, her fingers stiff but desperate. Her own body was now exposed to the killing cold, but her child was wrapped, and for a moment she saw him breathe a little stronger. The fire was gone. The warmth inside her clothes was gone. She had nothing left to give. She looked around for wood, for anything that could burn, but the ruins were soaked with ice and ash. Metal and stone could not feed a flame. Her eyes searched, wild with fear. She saw broken wires, shattered glass, fallen machines. Nothing could make fire, nothing could make light. Her body shook harder now. Her hands were purple. Her lips cracked. Every breath felt like knives in her chest. But she still whispered to her child. Her words were weak, yet her heart poured love into every sound. She told him stories of a sun that once warmed their world. She told him of rivers, of green fields, though she had only seen them in old memories. She promised he would see them too, even if her voice shook with lies. The night grew colder, the air heavier. Snowflakes fell like ash from a dead sky. The child coughed, and the sound stabbed her soul. She kissed his forehead, her lips freezing on his skin, her eyes filled with tears, but the tears froze before they could fall. She pressed her body around him, skin to cloth, cloth to skin. She thought of nothing else but keeping him alive. Every heartbeat was for him. Every breath was for him. The silence of the world pressed against her ears. She imagined shadows moving in the ruins. She thought she heard voices, but it was only the wind. Still, she lifted her head and looked. Her eyes searched the distance, hoping for a sign, a spark, a miracle. But there was only blackness, endless and cruel. Her strength was fading. Her body leaned against the wall, her eyes half closed. She knew she could not last much longer. The cold was crawling into her bones, eating her alive, but she held her child tighter, refusing to let go. If she was going to die, she would die holding him. If her body turned to ice, it would turn. As a shield around him, a weak sound escaped the child, half cry, half breath. The mother opened her eyes again. She could not give up, not yet. She looked at her bare arms, skin raw from cold. She rubbed them against the wall, trying to make sparks. But only dust and blood came. She laughed bitterly, the sound broken. She was a mother with nothing left. No tools, no fire, no hope. Only love, and love alone was not enough to fight the cold night. Still, she refused to close her eyes. She forced herself to whisper again. Her child needed to hear her voice, even if the world had turned silent. Her child needed to know he was not Alone, she kept whispering. Words of comfort, words of lies. She promised warmth, she promised food, she promised morning. But the night only grew colder. Her body trembled, her lips bled, her eyes were heavy, her strength nearly gone. Yet she sat, holding her child like the last flame in the world. The city around her was ruined. The world was broken, but in her arms there was still life, still a heartbeat. And as long as she could breathe, she would burn herself away to keep that heartbeat alive. The night was cruel, the stars hidden. The cold showed no mercy. The mother had no clothes, no warmth, no hope, only her child and her love. And so she sat in the dark, shivering, waiting. For something, for someone, for a miracle to come. The night was endless, but the silence broke with a sound. It was not the wind, not the falling snow, not the cracking ruins. It was softer, weaker, and far more painful. It was the cry of a child, trembling, thin, almost fading. The alien mother pulled her child closer, pressing him against her chest. Her arms shook, her skin burned with cold, but her heart beat with fire. The cry pierced through the silence like a blade. It was not loud, not strong, but it was enough to tear her soul. She whispered, her voice soft and broken. She told the child he was safe, that she was here. But her words were thin smoke in the dark. The cry did not stop. The cry only grew weaker. It was the sound of hunger, of cold, of fear. It was the sound of a life slipping away. The mother pressed her forehead against the child's. Her eyes closed. Her lips cracked. Her body shaking. She tried to give him her warmth, though she had none left. She tried to give him her strength, though her own was almost gone. Every cry from the child was like fire in her veins. Every cry reminded her she could not give up, not yet. The ruins around her whispered of death. Walls broken, machines dead, lights forever gone. But the cry of her child was the only living sound. It echoed against the stone, against the metal. It sounded like a question, like a call to the universe itself. Will anyone hear me? Will anyone save me? The mother looked around, desperate. Her eyes searched the shadows, the corners of the ruins. Perhaps there was something left behind, some forgotten tool, a piece of cloth, a spark, a hidden flame. She moved slowly, carrying her child in her arms, every step heavy, every breath sharp. But the cry pushed her forward. She stumbled over broken stone. She pushed aside shattered glass. She searched under twisted metal. But there was nothing. Only dust, only silence, only the cruel cold. Her child's cry grew weaker still. The sound broke and cracked. It was like a candle almost out of wax. Flickering, trembling near its end. Her heart pounded with fear. She dropped to her knees, holding him tight. She rocked him gently, back and forth. Her whispers were fast now, desperate. She told him stories of light. She told him of fire that once burned in their home. She told him of music that once filled their nights. She told him of laughter, of voices, of warmth. But her child only cried, small, tired, fading. The mother began to sing, though her voice was weak. It was an old song, from the time before the war. Her people had sung it to children on warm nights. She remembered her own mother singing it to her. Her voice cracked, but she forced the melody. The cry softened for a moment. The child's small hand reached weakly. His eyes opened just a little. For a heartbeat, there was peace. For a heartbeat, the mother believed the song could hold him. But the night was cruel. The cold pushed harder. The child coughed, his cry turning into gasps. The mother's chest filled with terror. She placed her lips against his and breathed. Her breath was weak, frozen. But she gave it. She shared every last drop of air. Her heart raced. Her tears froze on her face. The child's chest rose again. The cry returned, faint, but alive. The mother let out a broken laugh, half sob, half relief. The ruins around her felt different now. The cry was not just pain, it was defiance. It was the sound of life fighting death, the sound of a tiny flame refusing to die. The mother's strength returned for a moment. She stood again, holding her child like treasure. She would not let this cry fade into silence. She would not let the night win. But then she heard something else. A sound not made by her child. Not the wind, not the snow. It was distant, soft, but real. A faint hum. A faint light. The cry of her child echoed, carrying into the ruins, and in the distance the sound answered. The mother froze, her eyes wide. Her child's cry had reached someone. Something was out there in the night. Listening, moving, coming, closer. The mother held her child tighter. Her heart was torn between hope and fear. Was it friend or was it danger? Would the cry bring salvation or bring death? She pressed her child's face against her chest, her body ready to fight, ready to run. The cry did not stop. It rose again. Fragile but brave, small but endless. The child cried, and the world finally seemed to hear. The mother looked into the dark horizon, her breath shaking, her body weak but her spirit alive again. She whispered to her child, "Your cry is not the end. It is the beginning." And with trembling steps she moved, toward the sound, into the unknown, into danger, into hope. The night stretched long, endless and cruel. The alien mother's body shook. Her child still cried softly. The ruins swallowed every sound until something new arrived. A faint glow moved between the broken walls. It flickered like a torch, like a star trapped in the dark. The mother froze, her heart racing, her arms wrapped tighter around her child. Her eyes narrowed as she pressed her back to a wall. Was it a beast? Was it a soldier? Was it death? She had no weapon, only her body, and her love. Her child whimpered again, the cry carrying into the cold air. The glow grew brighter, and with it came footsteps, heavy, steady, not like her people's. A shadow stretched across the ruins, tall, broad, alien to her eyes. It was not her kind. It was human. The human walked carefully, holding a small lamp in one hand. His breath rose in clouds. His boots crunched against the frozen ground. He was wrapped in heavy gear, layers of cloth and metal. Heat coils glowed faintly along his chest and arms. He looked strong, warm, alive. The mother's heart pounded harder. She pressed her child. Against her chest, her first thought was fear. Humans were strangers, outsiders. Stories had painted them as cruel, selfish, hungry for conquest. But here one stood, walking into the ruins, and now he was only steps away. The human stopped when he heard the cry. He turned his head, scanning the shadows. His lamp's light cut across the rubble. It fell on her face, on her bare arms, on her trembling child. For a moment, the world froze. Mother and stranger locked eyes across the darkness. The mother's breath caught. Her mind screamed to run, but her body could not. Her child whimpered again, and the sound filled the air. The human's eyes softened, surprise giving way to something else, something warmer, something gentler. He stepped closer, slowly, carefully, his lamp lowered, his hands open. The mother hissed, weak but protective. Her teeth bared, though she had no strength to fight. Her body crouched over the child like a shield. The human stopped. He did not lift a weapon. He did not shout. He only looked at the child, and then at her. The silence was heavy. The wind whispered through the ruins. The child cried again, sharp and weak. The human's face changed. His jaw tightened, his eyes lowered, and for the first time in this dead place, the mother saw pity. The human crouched low, his lamp on the ground. He reached into his pack and pulled out a blanket. Thick, dark, heavy. With warmth he held it forward, not too close. A gift, a signal, a bridge between worlds. The mother's eyes burned with confusion. Why would he give such a thing? Why would he help when she was nothing to him? She looked down at her child. The child's cries were fading, his body shaking. The warmth of the blanket could save him. But could she trust? The human stayed still, waiting, his breath steady, his eyes patient. The mother's body screamed with cold. Her arms ached, her skin raw. Her child whimpered again, too weak to cry fully now. Her heart broke. She reached out with trembling hands. Slowly, painfully, she took the blanket. The human nodded, his eyes soft. He did not move closer. He did not touch. He only watched as she wrapped the child in the thick cloth. The warmth spread quickly. The child's small body stopped shaking as violently. His breathing grew deeper, slower, stronger. The mother let out a sob, sharp and raw. Her tears froze, but her heart warmed for the first time in days. The human reached again into his pack. This time he pulled out a small box. He pressed a button and soft heat spread from it. A portable fire, humming low and steady. He placed it on the ground between them. The mother felt the heat brush her skin. It was like touching the sun, she gasped, pressing her child closer to the warmth. For a long moment they said nothing. No words, no shared tongue. Only eyes, only silence, only fire. But something passed between them. Something fragile, something powerful. Not enemy, not stranger. Something closer to trust. The human finally spoke, his voice deep but soft. She could not understand the words, but his tone was calm, kind, careful. He pointed at the fire, then at himself, then at her. An invitation. Stay. Rest. Share warmth. The mother's heart trembled, her instincts told her to fear. Her mind told her to run, but her child's face was softer now. His small breath steady. Her arms loosened their grip. Her body eased for the first time. She lowered her head in silent acceptance. She would stay, at least for now, for the child, for survival, for hope. The human leaned back, his eyes lifting to the broken sky. The lamp flickered. The fire hummed. The ruins around them remained cold and dead. But here, between them, warmth grew. A fragile light in endless darkness. The human had entered her night. And with him came the first breath of dawn. The fire glowed softly, pushing back the cruel night. The alien mother sat close, holding her child wrapped in the human's blanket. The warmth touched her skin, but fear still lived in her heart. Across the small fire, the human sat silent, watching, waiting. The mother's eyes stayed sharp. Every breath of the human felt strange. Every sound of his gear reminded her he was not one of her kind. Yet when she looked down at her child, she knew she could not push him away. The child's breathing was steadier now, his small face calm in the firelight, but his body was still weak, still fragile. The mother's heart pounded with the truth. Without help, the child would not last. She raised her eyes, meeting the human's gaze. He did not look cruel. He did not look like the monsters from the old stories. His eyes were tired, heavy with his own battles, but inside them was something she had not seen in years. Kindness. The mother wanted to speak, to beg. But her tongue could not shape the human's words. Her language was useless here. Still she tried. She whispered sounds, broken, soft, almost lost to the fire's crackle. The human tilted his head, listening, but he did not understand. The mother's voice faded. Her throat, tight with despair, she realized no words could cross the space between them. So she tried with her hands. She pointed at the child, then pressed her hand against her own chest. Her fingers trembled as she stretched them toward the human. A silent plea. Help. Save him. Not me, but him. The human's eyes softened. He placed his hand over his heart, then pointed to the child, then to the fire, then back to himself. His face was calm, his movement slow. The mother's breath caught. He understood enough. The child stirred, a small cry slipping past his lips. The sound was weaker than before, yet it pierced the silence. The human leaned closer, his hand resting near the blanket. The mother flinched, her body tightening. She pulled the child back, her eyes sharp. Again, the human froze, his hand lifted but empty. He did not push, he did not force. He only waited, and slowly lowered his hand. The mother's chest ached. Her fear was heavy, but her need was stronger. She looked down at her child's pale face. She felt the tiny heartbeat against her arm. She thought of the nights she had survived without food, the days she had walked with bleeding feet. She could bear pain. She could bear hunger. But the child could not. The child's cry was fading, and if the cry ended, the world would end with it. She lifted her eyes again, tears frozen on her cheeks. She opened her arms just enough, the blanket loosened slightly, revealing the child's face. She turned the child toward the firelight, toward the human, not giving, not surrendering, but showing, a plea without words. Look, see him. He is all. He is my world, do not let him die. The human leaned closer, his breath clouded in the air, his eyes fixed on the child. For a moment he said nothing, but his face told a story, lines of pain, of memory, of someone he once held and once lost. His lips pressed tight, his hand clenched. Then he reached into his pack again. The mother's body tensed, her heart raced as she watched him. But when his hand returned, it carried no weapon. It carried a small pouch of food, wrapped in foil, warm from his suit. He opened it slowly, showing the contents, a soft bar full of energy, full of life. He broke it in half and held one piece out toward her. The smell touched her nose, strange, but rich. Her stomach twisted with hunger, but her eyes stayed on the child. She shook her head and pointed. Not me, him. The human paused, then nodded. He leaned forward, his hand steady. He placed the food in her palm. She looked at it, then at him. Her throat burned with gratitude, but her voice was still. Silent, so she lowered her head and pressed the food to her child's lips. The child stirred, his mouth opening slowly. The taste was strange, but his body accepted it. He chewed weakly, swallowed, then cried again. But this cry was different. It was not only pain. It was life, returning. The mother's heart leapt. Tears filled her eyes once more. She lifted her gaze toward the human. Her lips trembled as she tried to form words, but none came. So she bowed her head instead, her silence heavier than speech. Her silence, filled with thanks, her silence was a plea answered. The fire flickered, the ruins whispered. The child rested again, wrapped in warmth and fed by a stranger's hand. The mother sat close, her body still shaking, but her spirit unbroken. The human leaned back, staring into the fire. Neither spoke, neither needed to. The night carried their silence, and in that silence trust began to grow. The plea had been made. The plea had been heard. And in this cold and ruined world, a mother and a human began to share the same fight. To keep the cry alive, to keep hope burning. The fire hummed softly, small but steady. The alien mother sat near it, her child wrapped in the heavy blanket. The child's breathing was slower now, his small chest rising and falling like fragile waves. The mother's eyes stayed fixed on him, her hands never letting go. Across the fire, the human studied them, his face half hidden by shadows, his gear glowing faintly in the dark. He said nothing, but his eyes told stories. Stories of battles, journeys, and losses only he knew. The mother did not understand his words, but she understood his silence. Silence could be sharper than knives, or softer than hands, and tonight, his silence carried no threat, only patience. The mother rubbed her child's tiny hand between her palms. The skin was warmer now, but still pale. She bent close, whispering softly. The child made a weak sound, not quite a cry, but alive. The mother's chest ached with hope and fear. Every moment felt borrowed, every breath uncertain. The human moved again, reaching into his pack. The mother's eyes followed sharply, ready to shield her child. But when his hand returned, it carried no weapon. It carried a cylinder, smooth silver, glowing faintly blue at the edges. He pressed a button and heat burst out. Not fire, but something cleaner, steadier, human-made. The mother gasped, her eyes wide. Warmth spread from the cylinder, chasing away the cold around them. It was like the return of a son she thought was gone forever. Her child stirred, his body relaxing against her chest. The mother looked at the human, disbelief painted across her face. How could he carry the power of fire in his hands? How could he give it away so freely? The human placed the cylinder on the ground between them. He pushed it slightly toward her side, his eyes steady, his movements slow. The meaning was clear. It was hers now, to use, to keep, a gift of warmth. The mother's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to ask, to understand. But her voice broke under the weight of silence. Her eyes filled with tears. Hot at first, then frozen on her cheeks. She pulled her child closer to the heat. The glow touched them, and the child sighed in his sleep. It was the sound of relief, of comfort, of life choosing to stay. The mother looked back at the human, her eyes searching his face. Why would he do this? Why would he share his fire with strangers? Her people had taught her fear of outsiders. But here was one offering warmth, offering life. Her lips parted, a sound escaped, not words, only breath. The human nodded slowly, as if he understood anyway. Time passed slowly in the ruins. The wind outside howled. Snow swept across the broken walls. But inside their circle of fire, there was peace. The mother shifted closer, her body still weak. The human pulled another piece of cloth from his pack. He spread it on the ground, a shield against the frozen stone. He motioned for her to sit, pointing to the cloth. At first, she hesitated, fear twisting in her chest. But then she lowered herself onto it, her child safe in her arms. The warmth seeped into her bones. For the first time in many nights, she did not feel only pain. The human sat across from her. He reached again into his pack and pulled out a flask. He opened it, steam rising from inside. The smell was strange but comforting. He drank, then extended it to her. She stared at it, her hands trembling. Was it safe? Was it poison? But her thirst clawed at her throat, her lips cracked, her body weak. She took it, slowly. The liquid touched her tongue, warm and rich. Her body shuddered as the heat spread through her chest. Tears welled in her eyes. She pressed the flask to her child's lips. A drop touched his mouth, and he stirred again, alive. The human watched silently, his face unreadable, but his eyes gentle. The mother lowered her head. Her silence carried more weight than words. It was gratitude, raw and unspoken. The child shifted in his sleep. A small hand slipped free of the blanket. It reached out weakly, brushing the air. The human froze, his eyes fixed on the hand. Slowly, carefully, he extended his own. The child's tiny fingers touched his glove. A fragile contact, soft and fleeting. The human's breath caught, his eyes closing for a moment. When he opened them again, there was something new inside. Not just pity, not just duty, but connection. The mother watched, her fear still alive but mixed now with something else, something she had not dared to feel in so long. Hope. She pressed her lips to the child's forehead, then lifted her eyes toward the human. No words, no language, but the meaning was clear. She trusted him for this night, for this gift. The fire burned steady, the cylinder glowed bright. The ruins outside were still cold and dead, but inside this small circle, warmth lived again. And in that warmth, a bond was born, fragile, uncertain but real. The gift of warmth was more than fire. It was the spark of something greater, something that could change the night, something that could change the world. The fire still burned, but the night was long. The alien mother held her child, wrapped in warmth. The human sat across from her, his eyes fixed on the shadows beyond the ruins. Neither spoke, yet the silence between them was full of meaning. The mother's mind battled itself. One voice told her to trust, to follow this stranger. Another warned her to run, to hide, to protect her child from unknown danger. Her heart trembled between hope and fear. But every time she looked down at the child, she knew the truth. Alone, she could not keep him alive. The human stood, his tall form blocking the faint light. He reached for his lamp, its glow cutting through the falling snow. Then, he turned and pointed into the distance. Beyond the ruins, toward the dark horizon, his hand made the signal clear. Follow me. The mother's chest tightened. Her arms hugged the child closer. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. Why should she leave the ruins she knew? Why should she step into the unknown with a stranger? But then the cold wind swept through again. It pierced her bones. The fire was fading. The warmth would not last forever. The child stirred, his cry weak but alive. The sound cut through her doubt like a blade. She raised her eyes to the human. He stood still, waiting, patient, his hand outstretched, not forcing, not demanding, only offering. Her body shook as she rose, her legs heavy, her strength nearly gone, but the fire in her heart carried her forward. Step by step she moved toward him. Her child clutched against her chest, her hand trembling as it hovered near his. Finally, with courage born from desperation, she placed her hand in his. The human's grip was firm but gentle. Heat spread from his glove. It was the warmth of life, of promise. For the first time in endless nights, she felt she was not alone. They walked together, leaving the ruins behind. The snow crunched beneath their feet. The wind screamed across the empty land. The human carried his lamp high, its glow cutting a path. The mother leaned against him when her strength failed. The child rested between them, silent but breathing. Hours stretched long. The land was endless, broken and cruel. Shadows of dead. Machines lay half-buried in the snow. Twisted towers reached toward the sky like broken fingers. The world was silent except for their steps, and the mother's heart beat with every sound. She thought of her people, once many, now scattered or gone. She thought of the war that had taken fire, food, and hope. And now here she was, walking, with a human, the very being she had been taught to fear. Yet without him, she and her child would already be ice. The human paused, scanning the horizon. He raised a device to his eyes, glass shining faintly. He looked long into the distance, then lowered it. He turned to her, motioned again. Forward, just a little farther. Her body trembled, her legs begged to stop, but her child stirred, opening, his eyes for a moment. A tiny hand reached up, brushing her chin. Her heart burned with new strength. She nodded once, and they walked on. At last, a faint glow appeared on the horizon. Not the lamp, not the fire. Something larger, steadier. The human pointed, his eyes bright with certainty, shelter. The mother's breath caught. Her steps quickened, despite her exhaustion. Her eyes locked on the light. It was small, distant, but it meant warmth, food, safety, the promise of survival. But fear crawled into her heart again. What if others waited there? What if they were not like this human? What if kindness turned to cruelty? Her arms tightened around the child. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion once more. The human seemed to sense her fear. He stopped, crouched low, so his eyes met hers. He pointed at her child, then at his own chest. He placed his hand over his heart, his face calm, his eyes steady. The gesture was simple. I promise I will protect. The mother's throat burned. Tears stung her frozen cheeks. She wanted to believe. Her fear screamed, but her hope whispered louder. She nodded once, slow but firm. Together, they walked again, toward the glow. The closer they came, the brighter the light grew. It was not fire, not a natural flame. It was human-made, strong, alive against the cold night. The child stirred, his eyes opening wider. He made a soft sound, not quite a cry, not quite a laugh. The mother's heart soared. Her lips brushed his forehead, her body trembling with relief. The human kept walking, his steps steady, but his eyes softened as he glanced at her. He saw her strength, her courage, her love, and, for the first time, he smiled. It was small, faint, but real. A smile that promised she was no longer alone. Behind them, the ruins faded into the dark. Ahead, light waited, warmth waited, survival waited. The night was still cruel. The world, still broken. But together, step by step, a mother, her child, and a human walked toward the dawn, toward life, toward hope. The horizon glowed faintly, a fragile line of light breaking the endless dark. The alien mother walked slowly, her child safe in her arms. The human walked beside her, his lamp now dim against the rising glow. Their footsteps echoed in the silence, carrying them toward the promise of dawn. The mother's body trembled with exhaustion. Her legs felt like stone, her breath sharp and heavy. But every time she looked down at her child, she found new strength. The child's face was pale, but his eyes opened wider now. He gazed at the world around him, small hands gripping the blanket. Alive. Still alive. The human glanced back often, scanning the ruins behind them, his eyes sharp, his posture alert. The world was not safe, and he knew danger could come from anywhere. But his steps never slowed, his pace steady, his presence strong. The mother watched him from the corner of her eye. Every movement reminded her of the distance between them. Different worlds, different lives. Yet here they walked as one. The light ahead grew brighter. It revealed shapes in the distance, not ruins but structures standing strong. Metal walls, glowing towers, smoke rising from chimneys. It was a human outpost, alive and guarded. The mother's heart pounded. Hope rushed through her veins, but fear followed close behind. She slowed her steps, her eyes narrowing. Would these humans accept her? Would they see her child as a life to protect, or as a threat to destroy? People had once feared humans. Now she feared them too. But the warmth in her arms reminded her she could not turn back. The human noticed her hesitation. He stopped and faced her. He pointed toward the outpost, then at her child, then at his own chest, his hand pressed firmly over his heart. The gesture was the same as before. A promise, unspoken but strong. The mother's eyes filled with tears. She wanted to believe. She needed to believe. Her child's small hand reached up, touching her cheek, his eyes bright with innocent trust. Her heart broke and healed at the same time. She nodded once, and they walked on together. Closer now, the outpost loomed large. Voices carried on the wind. Metal doors clanged. Engines hummed. Figures moved along the walls, armed and watchful. The mother's chest tightened. Her arms gripped the child protectively. The human raised his hand high, signaling the guards. A shout rang out, sharp and commanding. Weapons lifted, lights flared. The mother froze, her body shaking with terror, but the human did not falter. He shouted back in his own tongue, his voice steady, strong, unafraid. The guards hesitated, their lights fixed on the strange pair, one of their own and one alien. The mother's heart pounded like thunder. She crouched low, shielding her child with her body. If they attacked, she would fall first. Her child would be the last she protected. The human stepped forward, his arms out, his voice firm. The guards lowered their weapons slowly, one by one, suspicion melting into obedience. The gates opened with a groan of heavy metal. Light spilled out, warm and golden. The mother gasped, her eyes wide. It was like walking into a dream. Inside, the air was warmer. Fires burned in barrels, machines hummed with power, people moved about, their faces rough but alive. Some stopped to stare at her, at the child in her arms, their eyes filled with confusion, with doubt. Whispers spread like wind through the crowd, but no one raised a hand against her. Not while the human stood beside her. He guided her forward, through the gate, past the stairs, toward a shelter made of steel and canvas. He motioned for her to enter. The mother hesitated, her arms tightening around her child, but the warmth inside called to her, the glow of lamps, the smell of food, the sound of safety. She stepped inside, her child nestled close. The human followed, closing the flap behind them. The mother sat down, her legs giving way at last. She held her child on her lap. His eyes closed, his breathing steady. Safe, finally safe. Her tears fell freely, hot and unashamed. She kissed his forehead, whispering promises he might never understand. Promises of survival. Promises of tomorrow. She looked up at the human, Her voice silent, but her eyes spoke. "Thank you." The human sat across from her, his shoulders heavy, his face tired, but a small smile touched his lips. He looked at the child, then at her, and nodded. It was not the end of their journey. It was the beginning. Outside, the sun finally broke the horizon. Golden light spread across the frozen land, chasing shadows from the ruins. The night had been long, cruel, merciless. But dawn had come at last. A new day, a new chance. For a mother, a child, and the human who found them, yet in the back of her mind, fear still whispered. Would the others accept her? Would trust hold? Or would it break under the weight of old stories? The future was uncertain, but in her arms, her child was alive. And beside her, a human had chosen kindness over fear. That was enough for this dawn, enough to believe in tomorrow, enough to carry hope into the unknown.